with us forever and ever and ever.
This actually just happened recently in the past month. At my boyfriend's house, there's this doll. The doll is very old, plastic, with short brown hair, very creepy. Half of its face is melted into its shoulder, so the look of it gives off a weird vibe. Not even the look, but being around it, the energy is off. It's pretty tall, maybe like 3 feet or so. I didn't really pay attention to it the first couple of times I went over in the last month. My boyfriend's mum actually found the doll in a storage unit. She goes through storage units. They found this doll wrapped up in a bag and decided to take it home with them. When I first picked up the doll, I actually felt kind of scared but comfortable at the same time with it. I'm a very spiritual person, so I knew something was attached to the doll. When I had left their house, I got a call from my boyfriend telling me it was moving around the house and ending up in weird places. He decided to mess around with the doll and threw it down the stairs, to which its leg fell off. Out popped a brown piece of paper. The message written on it was worn off from old age. I went over there a week after and brought the doll upstairs with us, to which the dog was up there and started barking and growling at the doll. But I felt comfortable with it and didn't want to let go of it for some reason. It felt like something came over me and I was attached to the doll. And whatever was attached to the doll. My boyfriend started asking me why I was acting weird and told me to stop and give him the doll. I don't remember how long I was acting like this because I felt like something took over. I kept telling him that Amy will get mad and that she likes me. That's where the doll got its name from. My boyfriend finally took the doll from me and put it in the opposite room from him. Through his vent, you can see the room it was in. The next morning we woke up and the doll was staring right into his room from the vent. I swore to never pick up that doll again because whatever was attached to it isn't good. Ever since then, I've been having dreams about demons and dolls. Just so everyone knows, this will be a long one. A lot of information to state. So I'll just start with some history of the doll that was told to me by the previous owner. She was bought in Monroe, Connecticut, about 30-ish minutes away from the Warrens Occult Museum, at a second-hand store. The owner who bought it felt something was wrong with it and would often wake up with scratches and have nightmares every night. So, she gave it to a friend to sell it on eBay, the man I purchased it from. The man selling it had a few stories, like one for instance where he had family coming over, so he hid the doll in an upstairs closet so his niece didn't see it. The family slept downstairs and the niece woke up at 3 a.m, crying from a nightmare, and she described the doll he had upstairs. She had never been upstairs and had never seen the doll in person. She didn't even know it was there. So after that experience, he wanted to sell the doll, but didn't feel safe with it, so he put it in a storage unit. The company he was storing it in called him, asking for him to come and open the unit for them to prove there was no animal in it, as the security guard heard banging and movement in the storage locker at night. I, being very interested in paranormal, having a collection of Ouija boards, a haunted music box, and an exorcism kit from the 70s, decided to purchase this doll. And when it first arrived, the second I took it out of the box, all 4 of my dogs started growling very, very aggressively and moving backwards away from the doll. To clarify, my dogs love everyone. If a stranger broke into my house to rob us, they would greet him with wagging tails and licks. So this was very odd for them. As I stated earlier, I have an exorcism kit. With this kit, there is a cross that is almost locked in place with 2 pieces of metal. And around 30 minutes after removing the doll from the box, I heard a noise from upstairs. I went upstairs to investigate, It was the cross. The cross had been removed from the kit and fallen off my shelf and onto the floor. I was the only one home, and all the dogs were downstairs with me. My room door was closed. Ever since this experience, my family has been scared with the doll, so I put the doll back into the box and sealed it with salt and put it in the garage of my old house. I moved out with my girlfriend, and my family still lives there. I unfortunately forgot about it. As I was packing in a hurry, I forgot to get stuff in the garage. Nothing has happened since then, and I will be returning to get the doll soon, as my family will be moving soon. My apologies if this was hard to read. I'm not a very big English guy. These experiences are exactly how I remember them, and I personally am not afraid of the doll. I know I should be, but ever since I was young, I've loved everything paranormal. I even see spirits and auras all the time. I feel the evil in the doll, but it has no power over me, so therefore, I show no fear. Update. After I moved, my mother moved into her now ex-boyfriend's house. Let's call him Logan. And she put the doll in a shed. Not every night, but a lot of times throughout the week, they would look outside late at night and the door to the shed would be open. One time when Logan went outside to close the door, he heard something move in the shed. So he went inside to check what the noise was about. When he was inside, he couldn't find anything that could have made the noise, but he said he felt uncomfortable and cold, so he quickly went to leave. Just as he did, 4 truck tires that were sitting on a shelf fell right on top of where he was just standing. Yes, this could have been a coincidence, but it felt like it wasn't especially, since the doll was also sitting on that shelf. After my mother broke up with Logan, she moved into an apartment and she put the doll into a closet. She has told me nothing has really happened since then, but when she is alone, she hears footsteps and knocks. And the last few nights, she has been waking up around 3 a.m, hearing noises in her room, but can never see or find anything. I will be visiting in January and will be bringing the doll back home with me when I leave. I lived with my grandma and grandpa from the age of 8 to 14. So my grandma collected dolls of all kinds and kept them in the guest bedroom. She had over 100 dolls, a lot of them being porcelain, but some of the dolls were old, unsavory looking dolls. And the one that creeped me out the most, was one of those ventriloquist dolls, basically the same one featured on Goosebumps. Anyway, my bedroom was right next to the guest bedroom. And when I first moved in, I was not really bothered by the dolls, maybe because I was younger and always distracted by other things. As I got older, I started to get a really bad feeling from that room and would start shutting the guest room at night because when I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would have to look at that room coming back. But when I did eventually get up to go to the bathroom, the door would be open, knowing full well that I had closed it before I went to bed, and my grandparents claimed to not be responsible. When I was 12, one of my grandma's friends had passed away, and she had taken a lock of hair from that friend, now dead, and attached it to the head of one of her oldest dolls. Soon after, I started to hear voices coming from that room at night, and every time I would go past the room and peek in, I felt all the eyes of the dolls were staring straight into my soul. When I was 13, I started to get really bad nightmares and would wake up to the bed shaking. I would jump out of bed and it would continue to shake, and I would be too much of a chicken to wake my grandparents up to tell them about it, because their answer to everything is to pray for deliverance and ask God to cast away the nightmares, because the only kind of spirit is the Holy Spirit. These episodes of bed shaking and constant voices coming from the doll room never stopped, but the last straw for me was the black shadow that would fly across my room. So I started to always sleep with something over my eyes, and still do to this day. I ended up moving in with my aunt after it had gotten to the point of me not wanting to go to my room at all. I'm terrified of dolls to this day. They are all evil bastards. Summer before last, my boyfriend and I took a road trip to Omaha, Nebraska, with the main purpose of visiting the Museum of Shadows. We're both somewhere between a believer and a skeptic, and thought it would be a great experience for us. He even paid the $20 to rent a spirit box to use as we walked around the museum. If you haven't visited the Museum of Shadows, I'd recommend it, even if only because I found it very cathartic. It's mostly dolls with tragic stories attached to them, but walking around reading all the stories of suffering and sadness families associated with many of these items was very heart-opening, for lack of a better way to word it. Some items I felt were just creepy, and that's where people's associated haunting came from when people own them. I believe sometimes people create their own hauntings by just being afraid of an object. Same with the dolls owned by children who have passed. The families are just so saddened and grieve so hard that they begin to assign their child's spirit to those items. It's so sad, but really made me feel a great connection to people I didn't even know, which I think is great for the spirit, however sad. So our spirit box was not giving us anything. Literally, not a single intelligible word. We were not angry or disappointed. It was sort of a neat if we hear something, but understandable if we don't sort of thing, because we sort of assumed a majority of items in there could not be haunted. They've got this doll, Demas, and when I say my heart rate increased just typing her name, I'm not lying. She lives in a chicken wire cage toward the back of the first floor of the museum. She is scary looking, not a normal looking doll. I got uneasy just when I saw her, and this is in a building of frightening dolls. Maybe that's intentional though. Maybe they put her in the cage to raise your apprehension. There is a sign above her that says if you choose to speak to her, always say goodbye, which of course you should do with any spirit, but Demas is apparently particularly malicious. I'm a pretty bold soul, so as we're standing there together with the spirit box, I decided I wanted to talk with her. "Hello, Demas," I said, and the spirit box just kept clicking. I don't know what to talk to her about, but I'm always worried about lost spirits, so I decided to say, "Are you okay?" And without hesitation, the spirit box said, "Amanda." Very clearly. My boyfriend and I both heard it. I said, "Did it just..." And he was like, "Yes, absolutely, it said your name." I said above that I'm brave, but I was immediately filled with a sense of dread. Something about it saying my name and that we'd gotten absolutely nothing else out of the box the whole time was terrifying, and I do not scare easily. I didn't continue the conversation, I just said, "Goodbye, Demas," and ushered my boyfriend away from her because it was so uncomfortable with her following that. Just now I went through their Facebook feed to see if I still felt the same about her, and saw an event where they let people hold her. I've never felt so appalled seeing such innocent-seeming photographs. That doll is the only item I've ever encountered that I am sure is 100% haunted, and maybe even malicious. A few people seemed to like my first doll encounter, so I thought I would add my other two here. Dolls are no longer welcome in my house, and I live with my sister from the first story. We are close and don't care if you believe any of these stories, but it's nice to get it off my chest. Story 1. I was around 12 and Mum called me in to open a box. I asked what it was, and my mum had no idea, just that it was from an old family friend. Upon opening it, I saw a porcelain doll dressed up to look Scottish with brown hair. Both Mum and I got bad vibes from it, having had a fear of dolls from what happened when I was 8. I backed away, Mum not wanting to waste a nice gift, placed it on top of the bookcase. It was in view every time I walked down the hall, I hated it. Over the next few weeks, I had nightmares of the doll climbing down and killing me. I ended up shoving it in a dresser drawer until the skip came. We were cleaning out the attic and ripping up carpet. All the time I noticed Tugger would be flipped around to face the door. He was the one thing I knew was on my side. On the day of the skip, I threw it in, and hearing it shatter was a relief, until Mum asked how I got scratched. My fears were justified. Once the skip had taken everything away, everything went back to normal. Story 2. For Christmas, my sister got a toy Barbie plane set with 3 Barbies and 1 Ken. We shared a room, so I was forced to sleep, knowing something I feared was in there with us. My sister loved the toys. She was around 8 or 9 at the time. I was forced to play with her, hiding my fears. She has mild autism and I didn't want to make her upset. At one point, she asked me if I had turned Tugger around, which made me drop the Barbies. I knew if he reacted, something bad was going to happen. Over the next few months, my sister played with them so much. It was worrying. This all changed when I had to pee during dinner and saw the Barbies sitting up, when she had left them lying down to dry. Her logic, not mine. I called out saying it wasn't funny. She came in just as all the heads turned towards us. We screamed and quickly grabbed them, chucking them in the trash. Mum didn't question it. Our mum did wonder if some kind of guardian angel or deceased relative had attached itself to Tugger. I have no idea even to this day what Tugger is, but at least he's a good guy. I'm a huge porcelain doll collector and have been doing that for years. A few years ago, I went thrift shopping for some new dolls. When I was walking in the store, I saw this beautiful Chinese-looking doll. I immediately knew that I wanted it because I didn't have a doll like that yet. When I went to grab the doll, I got chills all over my body and something told me not to buy it. Yet, I still did because I really liked it. And I'm impulsive. If I want it, I'll get it. I took the doll home and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, having the feeling something was staring at me. I looked behind me, and the first thing my eyes crossed with was my new doll. I never get scared at night from any of my dolls, but it took me some hours to get back to sleep. This was going on for a few days where I constantly felt anxious if I was around that doll. One night I had a terrible nightmare, and in the nightmare I kept seeing frames of the doll, laughing as she did terrible things to family members. When I woke up, I knew that was the last straw. In my dream I burned the doll, but I've decided to put it in the trash bin as soon as possible. After that, I never had any bad experiences with the doll ever again. No nightmares, no feeling randomly anxious. Do you guys think this was something paranormal? Or was my mind just playing tricks with me? So I begin this story with a small briefing. Only 3 people in my life have heard me tell it, and one of those 3 being my mother. She believes this story to be false and that I simply made something up because I was young. Well, I say this. I am now 28 and I still believe what I saw and what happened to me all those years ago. The year is 2004, when I was 12 years old. I had a best friend at this age, and my best friend was my closest cousin. We were inseparable. Whenever we could hang out, we did. One Friday after school, my sister was nice enough to take me home rather than ride the bus. She also picked up my cousin as well, who, for the sake of the story, I'll call Laura. We go to Laura's house first, to get permission from her parents to hang out with me over the weekend. They agree, and Laura's older sister, who's around the same age as my sister, also tags along with us. We get back to my parents' house and my mother asked if I would want to stay the weekend at my grandparents' to spend some time with them. I told her I didn't mind, but I would need to call Laura's parents to also see if they were okay with it as well, since Laura was our guest. Laura's parents once again agree, and so I begin to pack my things for the trip. I loved my grandparents more than anything. They were such kind and noble people. My grandmother being the nicest person I've ever known. I know that sounds cliche, but in my lifetime, I've never heard my grandmother curse or talk down to anyone. Anyway, we arrive at my grandparents' home. My parents say their pleasantries and leave. Laura and I spend a few hours just talking to our beloved grandparents about how we're doing and life in general. Eventually, my grandmother, like all grandmothers, feels the need to feed us, so she begins preparing dinner. While grandmother is busy, Laura and I decide to go to what we call the grandkids room. Basically, the grandkids room is where my grandparents keep all the toys and various knickknacks for the grandchildren. The same room also housed her famous Super Nintendo, which is what Laura and I were going in there for. As I started to load up a Ninja Turtle game, I noticed something in this basket of baby dolls my grandmother kept for smaller grandkids. Inside this basket was this ugly, wild-haired, wicked-looking baby doll. I immediately stopped what I was doing and pointed out the doll to Laura. She had the same look on her face as I did when she saw it. Laura was always more curious than I was, so she walked over to it to examine it closer. After about 5 minutes of us looking at this doll, we noticed it has the odd effect of its eyes changing color, cycling through different shades of greens and blues. With the doll already being creepy enough and its eyes adding to it, we both ran out of the room and exclaimed to our grandmother our distaste of her doll. We began to interrogate her, asking her where she got it and why she got it, etc. She just laughed and told us she found it at a yard sale, and that there was nothing more to the doll than it just being a doll. Over the course of a couple of hours and eating dinner, we forgot about the doll and continued our conversations with grandmother. Around 11 p.m. or so, my grandfather had something happen with his pacemaker, so my grandmother had to get him to the hospital. We were in the south, so around the age of 12 back then was old enough to be left home alone. Laura and I watched as our grandparents left the home in a hurry. Laura tried to go to sleep, but I wasn't quite tired yet. I stayed in the living room and watched TV with my concern for my grandfather laying heavy on my mind. TV wasn't doing enough to keep me occupied, so I had to think of something else to do. Then a thought occurred. I remembered the doll and how it gave Laura and I a really eerie vibe. I sped into the guest bedroom and woke up Laura. I told her we should see if that doll is haunted. She looked at me, and once again, with her being more curious, she smiled and told me she would accompany me to play with the doll. We went into the grandkids' room and found the doll, still laying face up in the same basket we found it in. I grabbed the doll and said, first we should test it. We should set it on the couch here in this room and leave it and see if it moves. Laura laughed and said, if this doll moves, I will probably get rid of it for grandmother. I nodded in agreement and we left the doll sitting in the middle of the couch in the room. We went back to the living room and continued watching TV. Laura asked how long we should keep the doll alone before checking in on it. I replied, let's check in about 30 minutes. We both sat, quiet and stone-faced, as we patiently waited for 30 minutes to pass. Finally, the time came, and we both slowly entered the room to check on the doll. To both of our surprise, the doll had, in fact, moved. Rather than being in the middle of the couch, it was sitting at the far right edge. Laura looked at me, her eyes wide and her mouth agape. We then both laughed because we literally could not believe what just happened. There has to be an explanation, I remarked to break the silence. Laura said, it's just us here, and we both sat in the living room. What explanation can there be? I felt my stomach turn and said, "Okay, well, this time, let's leave it where it is and then check on it in 10 minutes. For some reason in my 12-year-old brain, I thought if I gave it less time, then surely it wouldn't move again. 10 minutes went by like hours, and so we once again go back into the room where the doll was. To our disbelief, the doll moved again, and this time was sitting back in the middle of the couch with its head turned slightly towards the door, as if it were trying to look at us. At that point, Laura freaked, ran into the room and grabbed the doll. She threw it at me and yelled, "Keep it with us until Grandmother and Papa get back from the hospital. We have to tell them about this." I agreed and made sure the doll stayed in our sight until our grandparents returned. Finally, after about 3 hours, our grandparents were back home. In order to make sure we did not disturb our grandfather after his hospital visit, we waited until he went to bed to confront Grandmother about our experience. We told her what had happened and that she needed to get rid of the doll because we were afraid of it. Once again, she laughed at us. She laughed and told us we were just sleepy and that everything seemed scary at night to children. Laura looked at me, and I could tell she was frustrated that we weren't being believed, as was I. Our grandmother agreed to at least put the doll somewhere where we wouldn't find it to help ease our minds. For some reason, that made us feel better and safe. The night goes on and we all sleep in until 8 or so the next morning. Saturday goes by pretty fast and we spend time with our grandparents and almost seemingly forgetting about the doll. Then comes Saturday night. Laura and I proceed to go to bed, having not mentioned the doll once the entire day. I drift off to sleep pretty quickly, and at around 2 a.m, I hear a loud thud. When I was young, I was a light sleeper, and sudden noises easily woke me. I sat up, seeing nothing, and went back to sleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for this time, but what woke me was a tug on my sheets, and what felt like something walking on my legs, like a small cat. I immediately thought about the doll, and instant fear overcame me. I could feel my face turn pale, as if my soul was attempting to escape my body. However, I somehow managed to gather enough courage to remove the sheet from over my face and tried to look at what was walking or crawling on my bed. As I am careful not to move, I tried to move only my eyes just enough to look down at my feet. What I saw to this day still haunts me. I saw the doll standing on me, moving its head in slow left to right motion, as if it was looking for something. The doll was also holding something, but I could not tell what it was. I was too scared to care. I very slowly turned my head to look at Laura. I was hoping she was awake and seeing this too. Laura rolled over on her side facing me, with the sheets pulled over her head, but her eyes still visible. I could tell she was looking at the doll too. With that validation, I moved my head to see only the ceiling. I closed my eyes and told myself it was my imagination and to go back to sleep. Somehow, I managed to drift away and woke up at 7 in the morning. However, upon waking up, I noticed sprinkles of what looked like bloodstains randomly on my sheets. I immediately began freaking out and threw myself out of bed. It was then I felt a pain in my leg. I looked at my left leg and saw that I had a pretty noticeable wound. It was like a scratch that was just deep enough to bleed. I turned back at Laura, who was still sleeping, and could hear my grandmother making commotion in the kitchen. I started to sprint towards the kitchen. As I'm making my way down the hall, I see something on the floor. Right in the middle of the hallway was the doll, laying face down. At this point, I'm almost about to cry. I run past it and confront my grandmother frantically. I tell her everything that happened during the night, while on the verge of tears. And yet again she disbelieves my story and told me it was a nightmare, telling me I scratched myself on my leg in my sleep and that I was overthinking things. Laura even told her of her account, and grandmother still was not convinced. She just thought we were trying to be mischievous children. After about 2 hours of us begging and pleading our grandmother to get rid of the doll, she finally agrees and decides to dispose of it. Laura and I both sigh in relief and decide to not spend another night there until we knew that doll was gone. Both our parents picked us up on Sunday, and we went in our separate ways. Months seemed to pass until I finally asked my grandmother what happened to that doll. She told me that she gave it to one of her friends for their grandchildren, and I felt terror. I told my grandmother I feared for the safety of the old woman and the grandchildren because of that doll, but my grandmother laughed and told me not to worry. I expected her to throw it away, but instead, she gave it to someone else. And now the doll would wreak havoc on that family. Here I am now, 28 years old, still telling this story and remembering it as if it happened yesterday. I do not care if you believe me or not, but I know what I saw that night, and my cousin Laura is also a witness. I don't know what happened to the family who got the doll, but I hope that it never harmed anyone, and that it's been destroyed since.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,